If you're curious to hear a little music from our guest Carla Lucero, who we spoke to in our most recent episode, check out E4TT's annual concert of music by women and non-binary composers, Midnight Serenades, on January 25th. Welcome to For Good Measure, an interview series celebrating diverse composers and other creative artists, sponsored by a grant from the California Arts Council. I'm Nanette McGuinness, Artistic Executive Director of Ensemble for these times. In this week's episode, we continue our conversation with Vivian Fung, who we spoke to in March 2022. Would it have been easier if there had been people who looked like you to mentor you or to study with?
Yeah, that's the thing that I think was most difficult for me. I mean, growing up, I grew up in Canada, and I was, I can remember in my elementary school, I was routinely called a chink, and I was like, it was, it was discrimination and just a lack of awareness of where I came from and what that meant. And then, when I was in college, I didn't really have, I had mentors and I'm grateful for my mentors, but I didn't really have someone I could talk to about all these issues that, have become so important to me, like identity and like gender, and also building a life around being a composer, not just writing music, but all the things that you have to do as human, having a family, building a life around it. And so when it comes to me giving back now that I'm in my 40s, I find it really important to talk about these things. And I love to do that as part of mentoring the next generation of composers.
Given that there are multitudes of Asian North American experiences, could you speak about yours? What has it been like being an Asian composer of classical music in Canada and the U.S.? Any differences between Canada and the U.S. or between coasts?
I don't see myself as particularly, one thing or another. I just compose, right? And what comes out. But I think, of course, it's a nature nurture type of thing. Of course, your environment influences your being and your music. And I think a lot of the differences between Canada and the US are socioeconomic, as far as the political infrastructure, each of the countries, they're very, very different. And that leads to differences in cultural tendencies, right? And so I would say that it's neither good or bad or better or worse. It's just very different. One thing that I've noticed is, in Canada, being a Commonwealth country, there is an affinity to more of the French or British influences. That there is that sort of tradition that is that Canadians are proud of, especially in Quebec with the tradition of the French. But I think those generalizations are, again, it's their generalizations. But I do think that, with the infrastructure of Canada having the support of the government, that makes a huge difference as far as, what gets programmed and what content there is there versus here. I lived in New York for almost 30 years, and you had the concentration of musicians there and the life, which is really rich. And New York is known for being a hub of cultural activity. On the West Coast, in the Bay Area, things are a lot more spread out. So, you have a lot of activity going on, but you not necessarily get to know about it because of the geographic spread. I think there are there's still a wealth of new music being written and being cultivated. It's just being spread out over this huge geographic area. So it can be a little bit trickier just because of that. But I think, being here for, a number of years, I've also gotten to know fabulous musicians to collaborate with. So I guess, for me, I have the best of all worlds because, having lived on the East Coast, I still connect with, my friends on the East Coast and the West Coast and making new friends here. And then being Canadian, I always had that, to go back to. And I still work with a lot of the groups up there. So I have all this trifecta of different groups that I get to work with, which is great.
Thank you for listening to For Good Measure, and a special thank you to our guest, Vivian Fung, for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button and support us by sharing it with your friends, posting about it on social media, and leaving us a rating and a review. To learn more about E4TT, our concert season online and in the Bay Area, or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit us at www.e4tt.org. This podcast is made possible in part by a grant from the California Arts Council and generous donors like you. For Good Measure is produced by Nanette McGuinness and Ensemble for These Times and designed by Brennan Stokes, with special thanks to audio engineer extraordinaire Stephanie Neumann. Remember to keep supporting equity in the arts and tune in next week for Good Measure.